You are about to enter the Ghostly Archives. All right, everybody, welcome to the Ghostly Archives podcast. I don't know if you've heard the theme music that I've put on this show, but it's new theme music. It was actually written for another show I was doing, another project, and that project had to, cease to function because life got busy. I was working and then immigrating, and it just never took off the ground. So I found it again, and it's such an amazing song that I had composed for this other folklore podcast that I was working on. And it was composed by my friend from the United Kingdom. His name is Matthew Lee Embleton. So look him up on Google. Wonderful, wonderful musician. And we did it to mimic the soundtrack, the theme song from the 1977 movie Suspiria. Yes, so I thought, you know what? This works perfectly with what I'm doing right now and still suits the Ghostly Archives. So I hope you enjoyed it. I will have the longer version playing as we roll out on the podcast today. Now, before I get into the guest, remember, you can help this podcast grow by 4 things. You don't even have to spend money. You can just give a little of your time and a few clicks. Subscribe to the platform of your preference. Share the content, like the content. And if you're listening to this on audio podcast, please do rate us 5 stars because it helps me show up. It helps me show up in the ratings. All right? So, let's talk about tonight's guest. Now, my guest today is Seriah Azkath. He has been exploring the fringes of society for over a decade on his show, Where Did the Road Go? I've been on his roundtables before on his show many years ago, and I'll tell you, the conversations there are always fascinating. So I do encourage you to check it out at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Like I said, if there's somebody who knows about the weird and strange, Seriah is it. So I'm not going to put this off any longer. Let's bring Seriah in, and we'll see where this show goes. What road this show goes down. Welcome, Seriah.
Yeah, glad to be here. It's been a while since we've talked.
I know. Life has weird roads that you have to go down. Don't you know it? All right. So before we get into talking about any kind of strangeness or anything like that, you've been doing this for a long time. What started you on wanting to start a show and explore this?
Starting the show, I actually hated talk radio, oddly enough. My dad used to listen to Rush Limbaugh like religiously, and it drove me nuts because I just heard it constantly. And I was like, oh man, I hate talk radio. And then I really got into Graham Hancock stuff. And Graham had posted he was going to be on Coast to Coast, and I'm like, nah, I don't want to listen to people talk, but I kind of want to hear Graham talk. So I tuned into Coast to Coast and went, oh, no, maybe I do like this if it's the right guest. So I started exploring and finding other podcasts, and at some point I started hearing podcasts talking to people who I wanted to talk to, who really didn't seem to care about the people they were talking to. They would just be like, they would not really be asking them good questions. They just weren't good interviews. Like I heard one with Robert Schoch, where Robert Schoch, for the only time I've ever heard him, go just into total promo mode because he wasn't being asked really anything useful. So he just started promoting the stuff he had going on instead. And I was like, I want to talk to Robert Schoch. Like I have so many questions for Robert Schoch. And I was already doing a metal show on a radio station in Ithaca, on a commercial radio station. And I said, hey, could I do a talk show on the paranormal? And they went, yeah, that sounds good. And that's how it started. I didn't really think about podcasting after I did like the first episode. I'm like, oh, I should put this up places. And so I started podcasting it. But it's one of the reasons people will ask me how many shows I've done. And they're not numbered, they're dated. And that's because they were on the date that, they aired on the radio show, as opposed to numbering like podcasts do now, It started out as a radio show. It still kind of has that format to some degree.
Right.
But yeah, so I blame Graham Hancock for all of it.
Well, it definitely has a radio feel. You do radio on like you have a lot of bands coming on
Yes,
and live shows like that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, we did. We built a live studio on my property. We used to be my computer shop. I moved the computer shop into the house, and we built a performance studio because the radio station had a performance room. And there was one year I think we had 60 bands play throughout the course of the year, and they weren't really opening the station back up after COVID. And we finally got tired of it, built our own studio. We took donations and turned the building into a performance space.
So why the paranormal? Have you had lots of experiences in it? Like what? Like
Yeah, pretty much. It pretty much runs my life. I mean, early on, I was just interested in the stuff. Around puberty, I had a Kundalini awakening, although I didn't know that's what it was. Kind of ruined my life at the time, but put me in a position that I think I'm much better off in than I would have been if that stuff didn't happen. And from that, other experiences started. I started getting into practicing magic and stuff, and all that stuff sort of combined. And I mean, now like little experiences happen all the time, little poltergeisty things and stuff like that. But those I don't even really pay attention to. I've had quite a few very weird experiences. Usually in times of transition, as I've noticed. I think it was Mike Clelland who asked me what was happening when like I saw a giant UFO, and I went, I don't know. And I took notes from around 1990 till now. And so I looked it up and went, oh, that was in a massive transition point. And so I started looking at all these events and going, yep, they're all at transition points, which was really interesting. George Hansen, who wrote The Trickster and the Paranormal, talks about that, of things happening when you're in liminal places. And Jeff Ritzmann, who I became good friends with, also really brought that to the forefront and talked a lot about that.
Just amazing. Before we go on, my husband just showed up in the chat and said hi. I have to thank you for something, Seriah. So I've recently moved to the States and got married. And how I met my husband, this is an interesting story, is he heard me on your radio show and friend requested me.
Nice.
if you can believe that.
That's awesome.
So we thank you, Seriah.
I think you popped up in People You May Know initially, and then I saw that you were into magic. And I was like, oh, I'm going to send her a friend request. She seems to actually know this stuff. And I think the first show you came on was one about, who did we talk about? Was it Austin Osman Spare?
I know I talked about some stuff, the experiences I had, but I know I was on one. I think it was like Everything is Demons or something like that.
Oh, that one.
I can't remember. There was a few of them.
Did you do the one with Austin Osman Spare?
I did, and I didn't even know who he was when we did that. I was like,
okay.
I know who he is now. I knew who Aleister Crowley was, but I didn't know who he was.
Okay. I think I saw Crowley stuff on your page maybe, and that's what I was like, oh, maybe I should talk to this person.
Interesting. Well, I'll tell you, I'm trained in graphic design, and I see a lot with companies and all the stuff out there with their logos and everything they're doing, and I'm like, oh my God, they're doing magic. Graphic design is magic. That's why I don't wear logos now. I'm like, oh my God, I just don't want to even wear a logo. I don't want them stamped on me.
Yeah, that's kind of what it is. I mean, it's like buy our stuff so you can advertise us.
Yeah, and we own you. We like own your soul. That's how I feel.
I mean, I'll wear band shirts because I want to advertise the bands, especially underground bands, because that's okay to me.
That's like they're a little bit more authentic than like a lot of bands when they start and they get big. You feel this authenticity, but when they go through this system, they sort of become this strange. Apparently, I have a slight echo. I'm being
Hmm.
told I have an echo. That's interesting. I'll check the settings here on my audio and make sure it's Blue Snowball.
Could be from my end. I'll lower my volume a little bit.
It might be my I'm using a new um boom arm here, so I might just be too close to my mic. Incognito says, "Hi, Seriah."
Hey,
Hi. That's my husband, by the way. He's out on the road and he's joined in. So, yeah,
nice.
I don't know. The whole logo thing is just bizarre, and I didn't realize it until I went through training
Yeah.
and then started reading about magic and sigils. I was like, "Oh my god."
Well, I mean, most advertising at this point is mind control.
That's right.
It's so much about knowing how we respond to different images and different things, and so yeah, it is kind of like magic.
Well, and the whole idea, it's not just the logo. Brand identity involves so much other things: color, texture,
Yeah.
smell, feelings,
Yep.
how they're going to make you use their brand to identify as
Yeah.
something more powerful than yourself. And you're kind of, it comes at a cost, unfortunately.
Yeah, it does.
So I was on your page and I was looking at this thing about Forest Poltergeist, and I thought it said Travis Walton at first, but I
Yeah.
was like, Travis Walton does Forest Poltergeist now, but apparently it is
What?
Travis Watson.
Yep. From Canada, actually.
Yeah, that was interesting. Very interesting because I lived in British Columbia where I was surrounded by a lot of forest.
Yeah.
And I've had those weird experiences in the forest. So, do you want? We'll start now. At like, can you speak on any kind of experiences you've had that are like, I don't know,
Well,
forest poltergeist or strangeness? That
well, first of all, the forest poltergeist idea came from me originally because I noted that when you see people doing Bigfoot hunting, most of the time they're getting things like vocalizations, rock throwing, things like this. All these things that happen in poltergeist encounters, except it's happening in the woods. So it's taking on sort of a primate feel. And I speculated that we may be interacting more with a wilderness poltergeist than an actual flesh and blood creature or a cryptid or anything. It might actually be energy coming from us or another source of PK energy that's creating these poltergeist effects. And we wouldn't really know the difference. And so Joshua Cutchin's actually the one who named it the wilderness poltergeist. Timothy Renner called it the wildergeist. It took both of them when they started looking into it after I said that, both of them from the flesh and blood Bigfoot idea to the yeah, Bigfoot's not flesh and blood. And Travis really loved the idea and asked me if it would be okay if he wrote a book and on the subject. So that's what he did because I wasn't going to write a book just on that because I. You mentioned you were on one of the shows where we did everything is demons. I honestly think poltergeists might be the thing that everything is to some degree. Like you see poltergeist activity in all of
Mhm.
this stuff. As far as weird experiences in the woods, I mean, I've had those Oz effect moments where you're somewhere and everything gets quiet and you get that ominous feel. I've never seen a cryptid, as far as I know. Um, yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time on the edge of the woods when my friends visiting friends who we'd hang out in this potter's field, and a bunch of weird stuff happened there because it was a potter's field overlooking. It was a potter's field for Willard Psychiatric Center, and it overlooked Seneca Lake. Yeah, it was on the edge of a cliff, which is why we started going up there. But numerous weird stuff has happened there. Other people have had weird experiences there. The weirdest, I had someone once say they thought it was an invisible Bigfoot. Um, I try not to label things, but there definitely could have been poltergeist stuff going on. In this case, we were standing, three of us were standing on the edge of the cliff, just hanging out. And there was a huge tree between us and the field where the potter's field was. And the tree starts shaking and the ground starts shaking like a large animal is jumping up and down like a deer or something like that. And I was like, oh, great, there's a buck on the other side of the tree, probably challenging us. That's not good. We have a cliff, and so I very carefully walked along the trail until I could see the other side, and there was nothing there. And as soon as I could see the other side, it stopped Everything stopped. And my one friend's like, "What is it?" And I'm like, "Nothing. There's nothing there." He's like, "How could there be nothing there?" So I walk back, tree starts shaking again. And I'm like, "What the hell?" So I walked all the way around to the other side of the tree so I could look through the field, and there's nothing anywhere. I walk back, it starts happening again. And he's freaking out at this point, and I'm going, "Okay, nope, this is genuinely weird." Our other friend wasn't seeing the tree shake. And so he's freaking out because we're clearly seeing something and he's not.
Mhm.
And then they decided we needed to leave immediately. Um, so we did. I went back up there by myself, and there was something very large moving along the tops of the trees, knocking branches down and occasionally making monkey-like noises. And I was like, "What the hell?" And I stayed there for a while and eventually just left. I mean, it didn't like change, it just kept moving. And this was like 1994 or something. So it's not like I had a cell phone where I could pull out and take a video of it. Uh,
And it's not like you were reading all this stuff on the internet. You
right,
know, it's a
right.
little more isolated.
Technically, I was reading the Necronomicon at the time.
Oh.
It's one of the things I noted because even though I didn't take the Necronomicon seriously, like I read it and I'm like, okay, this is a mix of Lovecraft and Sumerian stuff. Um, but there's a whole series of experiences I had in a very short period of time when I was reading that book, and I'm like, what does that mean? Like, I still don't think it's a real, book, but I'm wondering if it influenced the type of phenomena that was being manifested around me.
Well, I actually so my voice is totally echoing, and I don't know why. That's really bizarre.
I'm not hearing it on my end.
Oh, interesting. I'm definitely hearing it. Um, that's gonna drive me crazy, and it's never done this before. Let me see if I can switch around. I was just gonna say, me and my husband do believe that we can project things out that we're actually interacting with, and it can actually come real experiences. I don't know if you want to comment on that while I check some things out.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I think that's exactly what happens. I mean, there's a co-creation aspect. And I think a lot of people approach this stuff with fear, so they get scary experiences. And until they learn to not deal with them, with that fear reaction, they tend to remain scary. Most of the stuff that's happened to me has not been scary. Even that didn't scare me. It scared my friend. Um, but it didn't scare me. I was just like, oh, this is interesting. Um, so most of my experiences have not been scary, negative experiences. There's one or two here and there that have freaked me out. Um, but usually it's just kind of like something happens and I'm like, what is that? And I try to figure it out to see if there's just a rational explanation for what just happened or what. And sometimes I'm left with, I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, oh, that's what that is.
Mhm.
But I definitely think the way you approach the stuff affects the way it interacts with you.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, 100% I agree with that. It's just like my echo is really driving me nuts. I'm sorry, I know you can't hear it, but it's really I was not expecting that. Anyways, I definitely agree, and so I mean, I try to be really positive now. I mean, it doesn't always work. I mean, life happens, and you can have a negative reaction, or you watch a movie. Like I like horror movies, and I like scary stuff, and
Hmm.
I'm going, gee, am I projecting this out? Like, is this like, and then I look at like, okay, maybe movies, maybe stuff does have an effect. Maybe we do have to be careful. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I also, like one of the things that I found interesting within the last few years, they put out studies where they said people who listen to like heavy metal and stuff like that tend to be more well adjusted. And it's because you kind of like deal with that dark side of things. You have an anger release, you have, you're not as freaked out by the dark side because you're kind of inundating yourself with it. And of course, when I was growing up, it's like, oh, heavy metal's bad for you. It's so dark and it's so it's angry and it's going to mess you up. But it turns out, nah, psychologically, it was actually good for you, at least for some people. And I think horror movies kind of do the same thing. They kind of like make you a little more comfortable with that stuff, so it doesn't have the same negative effect that it might on somebody who doesn't watch them. Because I think if you're somebody who only watches romantic comedies, for example, and you have a paranormal experience, you're probably going to deal with that a lot more like, oh my God, that's scary, than if you watch a lot of paranormal horror movies where you might go, okay, wait, what's this? Like this is interesting.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times too that these it's like Grimm's fairy tales, they sort of prepare us
Yeah.
to handle the grisly parts of life a little bit better.
What not to do.
What not to do, and well, not necessarily project it. You can have positive things you want to do, but if it happens, you're not going to be totally caught off guard, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, hopefully, I'm not echoing anymore, guys. No, I am. You don't hear it at all, Seriah.
No. Is it still happening when I turn my mic?
Hello, can everybody hear me? No, it's not happening when you turn your mic off. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why. Because the speakers are very low and this mic is very directional.
Okay, well, we'll just go for it. But yeah, that's probably why. That's why it's happening. But all right. So I want you to talk about Kundalini because you said you had a Kundalini experience, and maybe there's people here who know what that is, but maybe there's people like who are joining that don't know what the heck you're talking about. So what is it and what happened?
Well, that's a really good question. What is it? Is energy. Um, Kundalini is a Sanskrit word for it. It's energy that starts at the base of your spine and moves up your spine to your crown chakra. I didn't believe in any of this stuff. Energy was one of those things where I was just like, yeah, whatever. But throughout my early life, I started having miscellaneous pains along my spine. I was having hallucinations that I knew were hallucinations, things that I knew weren't there, usually sounds, which is very common with Kundalini awakenings. Um, and it just kind of grew from there. And at some point, I came across a book advertising, a book about Kundalini, and it's like talking about things that happen when Kundalini's awakened. And I'm like, I have every one of these. What is this thing? So I went to the library, borrowed a bunch of books, and just started doing a deep dive into and at the time, again, this was early 90s, so there was no internet to go into. Did a deep dive into some of the writings about Kundalini and was like, oh, this is exactly what I'm experiencing. So it can be very potent energy. There's ways to raise it with like Kundalini yoga and stuff that's very calm. It's a very slow awakening. But when you're getting it awakened on you, like it did to me, and I don't know why it woke up, it can be very traumatic because you don't know what's happening to you. There's nothing in Western culture that really gives you a paradigm for a Kundalini awakening. There's not even really a word for it in Western culture. Although I suspect there are things. One of the examples I use there are what are called laughing churches, and you can Google them on YouTube. And the main person in the church will start and Kundalini can do this. It can cause spontaneous laughter. And it's not like infectious laughter where something's funny and everyone starts laughing and you can't stop. You start laughing and there's nothing funny. There's no reasoning for it. And you can touch someone and they'll start laughing. I've done this before. So I know that this is a thing. It scares the hell out of people when you do it to them. It's not one of the more common symptoms I have, but in these laughing churches, you'll see the guy and he'll go into one of these spontaneous laughing fits and he'll grab the next person and they'll grab the next person. The next thing you know, the entire line of people is laughing. And I suspect, even though they call that the Holy Spirit, I suspect that is basically the same thing as Kundalini. It's just terminology, really. But it is a transformative energy. So it definitely makes you deal with parts of yourself that you might not otherwise deal with. When I've met people and people who have this sort of morbid Kundalini awakening like I did, where it's not intentional and it causes a lot of pain and just and unbalance and stuff. uh, everyone I've dealt with this stuff, as I work on their energy, stuff will come into their head or it'll come into my head that they need to deal with. And like this, like I said, this is the type of stuff that going back prior to this, I wouldn't have believed a word of it if I hadn't experienced all of this stuff. I've met people who had very severe illnesses from it, and when I adjusted their energy, the illnesses went away. Stuff that medicine wasn't touching. And it's like, okay, so I, like Kundalini's the best word for it, I think, just because the culture had the best understanding of it. What it is exactly, I don't know. I suspect it's a part of us, and everyone has it. It's usually just asleep, and it's I don't know. It almost feels like it's a outside presence that you're interacting with, but I don't know if that's really the case as much as maybe a part of your higher self or something. That's
Well, that's
It's a
sorry.
lot more complicated than that, but that's the nutshell version.
Well, that's interesting. So I'm just going to mute you while I talk, just so it doesn't echo back, and then I'll unmute you when you want to answer. It's the easiest way to do it because I think that's what's going on. But that's really fascinating because I almost sometimes feel like, we're kind of clear, born clear. Maybe not, but I think things get blocked up and with all your experiences and feelings. And so it's interesting that was it's almost like you get unblocked, but it's so traumatic. It's like being born again.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And that's the kind of the thing, the series of experiences that gave me the name Seriah started with a massive Kundalini awakening. And I literally took it as sort of a rebirth because it made me feel like a different person afterwards. Um, all of a sudden, all this stuff I couldn't figure out and didn't know was there was brought to the surface, and I had to deal with it. And it literally felt like dying. And when it was over, I was like, I don't know what just happened to me because I still didn't know what Kundalini was. Um, and then it was shortly after that that I was given the name Seriah, and I went, I'm not going to use that name. That's not even a name. And once I started using it, everything started falling in place.
So who gave you that name? Like what when you say you were given it, who gave it to you?
Not a clue. It was spoken into my head very, very loudly. We had gone to see the Scorpions play, and this was 1991. And my friend was driving. His sister was in the front seat next to him. My friend was asleep next to me. So both women in the car were sound asleep. And we're just driving along. And all of a sudden, from my right ear, the ear that's closest to the window, the name Seriah it was like it was yelled into my head. And I knew immediately it was supposed to be my name. And I was like, no, what was that? And I was like, did you hear anything? And the guy, my friend driving, is like, no, why? And I'm like, okay, just checking. So where these things come from, I don't know. Sometimes I just know things. Sometimes they're spoken to me like that, and although that's much more rare. But when those things happen, they're almost always 100% accurate.
So it was sort of like a test question because I had this feeling that it was something that was like an inner working or something spoken to you because not with a name, but I've had similar experiences where a voice is just in my head telling me information that there's no way I could possibly know. And when I've ignored it, I've gone through hell and trauma, like when I ignored it on dating somebody who was not good for me. I had dreams and everything, and I ignored it. Hell, but when I listened to it, I may never know what was going to happen. But because I've ignored it before and seen the hell that's broken loose, I'm like, I better listen to it. And obviously, everything is fine. So you don't know what would have happened if you didn't. But I've not listened to that voice enough times to know I don't want to know what will happen. I just want to listen and take good care. So do you have that voice that shows up at other times giving you information or telling you some direction which you should go or avoid, like outside of giving you that name?
Yeah, but usually it's in dreams. I have a lot of prophetic dreams, and they're not even prophetic dreams. They're like information dreams. Like I'll be given information about something that's going to happen or someone I'm going to meet. Um, there was an experience we were just talking about on the last exit because my friend who was co-hosting that night, we went to Virginia to see Nightwish, and he had me drive because he didn't want to drive to Virginia. We took his car because his daughter, they were her favorite band. She really wanted to see them. That was the closest they were coming. So we're down outside of Washington D.C. on this like 5 or 8 lane highway, doing like 70 miles an hour. Cars packed all around us, and right before we got on this highway, something came into my head. It was almost like I was looking at a book and flipping through the book real fast and getting all the information from it. And I kind of just stopped and actually commented. I'm like, well, that was weird. What the hell was that? I feel like I just got information put in my head and I have no idea why or what it was. And like 5 minutes later, we're driving down this road and the car in front of us, I don't know what happened to it, but it just kind of suddenly went this way and slammed into the car next to him and then started spinning. And so we're right behind this car. And I never thought twice about it and just drove around it. As it was spinning, I went right around it as it was parallel to us and just kept going. Didn't even like, I mean, there's plenty of times where I've almost hit deer and stuff. You have the heart racing and everything else. There was nothing. It's like I knew it was coming. I just didn't know I knew it was coming. And he was commenting. He's like, yeah, if I was driving, we would have been dead. And I'm like, yep, I don't know. I just knew what to do and did it.
So I'm guessing everybody makes you drive now. You're like designated driver.
You would think. Most people just don't like driving. I've had so many close calls driving, but I've also saved situations a lot. So I guess it equals out.
That's fascinating. Now, I was recently, so I live in Utah now. And so I'm like having all this fun with stuff around here, paranormal wise, that I didn't know. And there's a lot in Utah. I didn't know that. And I was at this house where they're saying that Ted Bundy killed one of his victims. Probably didn't happen. He probably was never there. But it's supposed to be this portal, and I was filming it, and apparently there's all this mythology around. I wanted to get into this idea about portals, or what you think about them, because they probably tie into a lot of this poltergeist stuff and experiences. Do you think we can create portals, or like, what's your opinion on that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think like where I live now, all kinds of weird stuff happens. And I'm pretty sure that's because of me. It's because of the energy I put into the environment and because of the fact that I've practiced magic here for 40 years. But yes, I think that high emotional events can put stuff into an area, and it can create sort of a portal where it draws that stuff in. I don't know if it's necessarily a portal going anywhere as much as it's an area where activity it can kind of manifest easier. So it has the energy to manifest for one reason or the other. And there are areas like the Skinwalker Ranch region where it's probably coming from the environment more than anything. And there's areas where it's probably coming from people.
I agree. Like when I was at this TED, I'm writing an article about it that I'm going to have out, and I filmed it. I noted that probably Ted Bundy was never there because I was doing research on it. But I'm like, with all the energy that people have put into this location, including Ghost Adventures was there filming it. And I watched it because I couldn't get inside because his house was just in bad shape. And I'm like, Ted Bundy might as well have been there now from what everybody's putting into it and all the experiences they're saying that they're having at it. And turns out he probably, he did his heinous at his own location. And so it kind of started me thinking about how we start myths and legends and how we literally let them create a life of their own. And then other people come into the mix, and it's like this. It's almost like it grows and it mutates and it's becomes an entity all on its own.
Yeah, and David Weatherly always cites a case of a plantation down south that had a very well-known ghost. and the ghost had a whole legend about her, who she was, and all this other stuff. People got photos of the ghost that all look fairly similar. And then finally, someone did the historical research and found out this person never existed.
Mm-hmm.
So he's kind of like, well, this is a good example of a group created tulpa, perhaps, where we're creating this energy out of our beliefs. There were experiments like the Philip experiment that was done, where they literally attempted to create a ghost, and the ghost eventually took on a life of its own. And people were able to get information that they made for the history of this ghost out of the ghost without knowing the history that was made for it. And it started behaving very spontaneously at times. And again, it was very poltergeisty. Like I said, a lot of this stuff comes down to poltergeists. Um,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what you're talking about, at some point you'll see poltergeist stuff going on. Whether someone has a UFO, so like Kenneth Arnold, he saw UFOs, and afterwards had poltergeist activity in his house, and that gets kind of dropped because it's the UFO sighting that everyone focuses on. But I don't think he had poltergeist activity prior. People who have near-death experiences not only have Kundalini awakenings usually, it's a very common side effect, and but they also tend to have lots of poltergeist experience. I mean, I know you know Cheryl Lee Black. She's a great example of that.
Love Shirley.
Yes, and she had written me after I did the first show on Kundalini. It took me a while to talk her into actually coming on and talking about her stuff, but I mean, after 3 near-death experiences, she has lots of Kundalini, lots of electrical interference, and lots of poltergeist stuff going on. So there's something that changes our energy, and that energy interacts with the world around us.
Now, I know, like, if you're not aware of it and you're in a traumatic state or things are not good, you could probably send that energy doing chaotic things. So I kind of glad that more people are talking about this, because if someone's aware, instead of being scared of it, they could probably actually harness that for good things in their life. I mean, like you did,
Yeah, but there's no like it would be awesome if I could actually create poltergeist effects.
like Luke Skywalker.
Right, yes, like using the Force, but instead it's just kind of random unconscious things. I mean, I had a series of poltergeist events, and I wasn't even particularly stressed out. I don't know why these happened this one day, but I still had satellite TV, and I had just like the metal station on, and I think it was playing Budgie or something, so I turned it up, and then it went to AC/DC, which I'm not a fan of, so I muted it, and I left the room, and suddenly it came on full volume, and I was like, "What the hell?" And I walked back, and I mean, full volume on the stereo was almost unbearable. And I came back and I muted it, and I'm like, "Why did that unmute?" And I put the remote down, and then I heard a crash in the room I just came out of. So I went back into that room, and there was a large grinder my mom used to use to make like tomato sauce. She'd put tomatoes in this big cast iron thing that had been sitting far back in a high shelf that was now in the middle of the room. And I looked at this thing and I'm like, how would you even? And then the stereo unmuted again at full volume. And so I walked back there and I said, I don't like AC/DC, leave it off. And I muted it again. And this time it stayed muted. And then just a little while later, I went to do a show for Where Did the Road Go? And as I was talking into a mic just like this one, it has a physical switch on it. The switch turned off twice. There's no way for that just to happen. It's not a loose switch. It's a very solid click on and off. But I was in the middle of talking and suddenly I cut out and they're like, are you still there? And I'm like, yeah, and then I'm like, my switch is off. And then it happened a second time. And I'm like, what? Okay, stop. Like that's not all right. And the next day, which probably did not happen the next day, I had a CD case I would bring with me to the radio station, and it would sit on the floor sideways. So I went to pick it up, and it had somehow been opened, and CDs went everywhere. There's no way I could have put it down opened because it would have flopped open and CDs would have fallen out. So it was unzipped in place until I picked it up, and then everything went everywhere. And I went, okay, I'm accounting that to all the stuff that happened last night. Even though I didn't pick it up till the next day, it probably happened during that little spat of poltergeist activity. And I don't know what that is. I mean, I talk to it as if it's an other because I have no control over it. Whether it's other, something picking up that energy or information, somehow, I have no idea.
Well, it's interesting that you're kind of talking about like you don't know, it just happens unconsciously. And it's almost like that stuff happens from a certain vibration that we can't access as easy at certain thought levels. Like it's almost like it's coming from somewhere where the mind is at. I don't know if it's like some kind of theta, beta, I don't know what wave it is, but your mind obviously has to wave somewhere that's not like you and I talking right now. It's less likely to happen if we're paranormal researching in a group of people with voice boxes and EMF and yelling. It's likely that we're actually canceling any kind of experience out.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And we went to when I went to visit Timothy Renner at one point. It was around it was around Albatwitch. So before Albatwitch Day down there, is sort of a Bigfoot festival in Columbia, Pennsylvania, and we went over to Gettysburg afterwards. It's a couple weeks before Halloween, and there was this bridge he was researching, and there were so many people on that bridge running not just voice boxes but portal boxes, which I didn't even know what they were. They sound cool as hell, but I think they're completely. I mean, they sort of defeat the purpose, other than the fact that they look cool. From what I understand, they're basically just the frequency scanners, except put through a reverb pedal and then in a box with a bunch of black lights. So yeah, it sounds cool, it looks neat, but how could you utilize any of that information? And so many people had them, and there's just people lined up all the way up and down this bridge, doing, trying to talk to the spirits, and I'm like, this is kind of silly at this point. I mean, I guess it's fun if you're not that serious about it, but you're not going to get any serious information by doing this type of stuff. Um, I've taken people to like we went with Rosian from Project Archivist up to one of the haunted graveyards around here. And he's like live streaming from it and just talking nonstop. And I'm like, stuff doesn't happen if you're doing this. Like, you got to kind of just be quiet and attuned to the place. And that wasn't his thing at all. And of course, nothing happened.
Well, that yeah, not surprising that nothing would happen. I mean, we're going on a ghost hunt in February, so I'm I'm not expecting I'm gonna be not expecting anything to happen because there's probably gonna be 15 or 16 people there, but we thought I've never done one, so we thought, we'll just do it. But like if you go look at someone like Hans Holzer, they're in a small group and they're with a medium and they're literally getting the fill. They weren't sitting there with a whole bunch of devices and people screaming and yelling. They've got a medium and she's somewhere in some trance, like getting deep information. It reminds me of I was listening to Dolores Cannon and she hypnotizes people and get information. And it's from this really deep somnambulist level where strange stuff happens and strange information comes forth.
Yeah.
you know?
The problem with hypnotism is it's unreliable as like memory
Mhm.
recovery, but it's definitely a legitimate altered state of consciousness, and weird things can happen in that state. Um, I mean, I think there's so much more to us consciously, or I should say non-consciously, that we're connected to that we're unaware of. We just have no direct control over it. I mean, even most of our body functions, breathing, heartbeat, all that type of stuff, we have no real conscious control of that. There are certain monks that can control it, slow it down, or whatever, but your average person, there's just all this stuff that happens naturally, and it's still a part of us. Our brain is working to make that happen. So some level of our consciousness is involved, but it's not, we have no real direct control over it. Just like our dreams, for the most part, our dreams come from somewhere, and we don't really have a control over where those things are coming from or what they are, unless you get down into the ability to lucid dream. You're it's all coming from a level of consciousness that is us, but is not us at the same time.
Mhm. And I've done that where I've had these dreams and they're telling me, I don't know if it's me and it's picked up things that I'm just not aware of, and it's spitting it back at me. I don't know where the information came from, but I'm not going to say it because it's about someone. It was a really bad relationship I had actually while I was on your round table in that era there. And if I had listened to it, like I said before, if I had actually listened to it, I would have actually escaped a lot of crazy traumatic life. So it was a really good lesson to listen to it. But I can't tell you, like you said, I can't tell you where it came from, if it's me or if it's a collective consciousness or if it's a higher power that's like an angel that's watching me and saying, hey, I can see everything that guy's doing that you can't. I have no idea. It's a mystery.
I've had, I mean, I've had things interact with me directly that seem like spirits, that seem like something else. But even then, I don't know. And even when those things have shown themselves to other people, I don't, like I still can't say I'm not projecting that in some way. Um, the most interesting one was someone I was deeply connected with. We both had similar experiences with the same entity before we met. And so it was kind of like we're comparing notes going, oh, huh, well, that's interesting. Like, if it's coming from me, how is it appearing to someone I haven't met? But that was also someone that I dreamed about or was given all the information about 6 years before I met her.
Well, I actually believe that we can get information on future people 100%. Now, if anybody's in the chat, we had a whole bunch at once. It's dipped down. We got a bunch of people on Twitter. We got a bunch of people in chat. If you guys have a question for Seriah, pop it in the comments. Hopefully, I'll see it and I'll pop it up. We're coming to maybe the last 20 minutes or so of the show. So if you have a question, now's a good time to pop it up. If you have anything you want to pick Seriah's brain about, please do that and I'll pop them up right away. Oh, look at that. We got one. Here we go. So we got Seriah Rocks. Just go subscribe and listen to the entire channel history. So awesome. Okay, not quite a question, but thank you so much. Seriah does rock. Thank you so much for that, Scott. Scott.
So Christopher Ernst has also made a documentary about myself and Where Did the Road Go. The only way that's available right now is through the Patreon. But we're looking to get it streaming on like Amazon or something like that. A lot of people have asked about that. And I have part 1 of my autobiography coming up at some point, hopefully the very beginning of the year. So that's been a long time coming, and that's been a lot of shadow work too. Like I said, I kept a lot of notes, and when it was put in my head that I should record things, I was like, okay, because I didn't believe in magic. I'm like, this stuff doesn't really work, but I'm going to record what I'm doing so that I don't have to rely on my memory. I'm not going to get, oh, that worked, but I didn't write it down. So maybe it's not actually what I was trying to do, type of thing, because our memories are far from perfect. Our perceptions are far from perfect. So I wrote everything down, but it was also impressed on me to write everything down. And that came into play with the whole what's going on in your life when these things happen. Which I never would have guessed. I never planned to write a book about this stuff. It was just for my own personal use. And like I said, when Mike said, what was going on with your life when all this, when you saw the giant UFO over Seneca Lake or Cayuga Lake, and I was like, I don't know. Oh, look at that. Everything was going on right then. That was all transitional. And then I see a giant UFO. So writing this stuff down was very, very helpful. Like, when I was given the name Seriah, we were coming back from the concert. One of the things that didn't make sense to me is that I remember being given it as we were driving past the Willard facility, the psychiatric center, which is where my friend who was asleep next to me, she lived right down in that town. And I'm thinking, why do I remember her sleeping next to me, but we didn't drop her off? And so finally I went through my notes. I'm going, that memory's got to be wrong. And it turns out she had come to my house prior to the show, and we went from here. So her car was at my house. So that made perfect sense why we were driving past her house so she could come back and get her car. And I was like, okay, I'm glad I recorded that because I would not have had that information otherwise and would have assumed the memory was in error somewhere.
Well, that's fascinating. I'm just gonna mute this here. Yeah, again, if anybody has any questions, pop them up. I wanted to ask you about, since we bring up sigils, we bring up corporations, and I think they're super devious and what they do and how they control people. If they did it for the better good, I'd probably be more sympathetic, but I don't think that they do. But when it comes to magic, what is it that you practice? Like, what do you believe about magic? Because I'm sure belief weighs into it, and there's everybody has a different take. There's all these different practices or rituals or anything like that. Do you have some sort of specific avenue that you look at? I know a lot of Christians, I might have conservatives on my X, and I totally respect you guys because I know a lot of people believe magic isn't good or whatever. I'm just having this a theoretical discussion, so don't get too heightened. Go ahead.
So for me, I think the first thing magic wise I was looking at was Wicca. I very quickly realized that Wicca was not what it proclaimed to be, which was an ancient religion, because I started digging into the history of it and went, oh, this was basically created, a few decades ago. Okay. And that's not to say there aren't older witchcraft traditions and folk magic and stuff like that. But Wicca, as it is, was created a lot, as you probably know, from Crowley stuff and Gardner and stuff like that. Um, and then someone got me into Crowley, and I thought Crowley was interesting. I don't like ceremonial magic. So my goal was to kind of strip away the ceremonial stuff, which felt silly to me. And I figured if this stuff works, then there has to be kind of like Crowley did. If it works, there's got to be some science behind it somewhere. And so I said, okay, so what can I do, and what has actual effects? What works? What doesn't work? And I think it comes down to a lot of about how we create our realities. I don't think we all live in quite the same reality. Um, None of us has the same view of our lives, of the world, because um, we've all had different lives and exposed to different things, and this is why we all have different opinions on things. So when I lost my train here. Where was I going with this? Magic. So when dealing with magic, I said, okay, so how much of this can I strip away and actually have it work? And it turned out I could strip away a lot of it, and still things would have an effect. And I think that comes down to our ability to manipulate our realities. Um, and it wasn't to the Seth till I read the Seth material that made a lot of sense to me, which was channeled material through Jane Roberts, something else I did not take seriously until I read it and went, wow, okay, this is actually answering lots of questions and very precise information. And, huh. Um, Actually just did a two-part show on Seth, which will be the next two shows for Where Did the Road Go? But one of the things Seth talks about is how the unconscious creates reality, and how that is its language is symbols. So here you have sigils and things like that. So if you use something that is meaningful to you, but you can't keep it in your conscious mind, you have to let it drop to the subconscious mind, and that's how you affect reality. And I'm thinking, well, he just described magic without using the words, and he also explained Crowley's lust for result, because Crowley would say if you keep concentrating on the thing you worked on, it's not going to happen. You have to kind of just let it go, forget about it, put it in the back of your mind. So I read that when he just explained lust for result. Son of a bitch. So to me, it's sort of that level of manipulating reality. A lot of times it's trying to find out, for me, like, what current of energy am I in? What should I expect? Be prepared for that type of thing more than anything else.
Now, when you say current of energy, what do you mean? Like someone's like, well, what does that mean?
I think that I take that term from Kenneth Grant, I think, more than anything. But to me, I'll move through different. like synchronistic things will start happening, and I'll be like, okay, this is the current of energy I'm in. So a lot of times I'll use tarot cards, and when I write my notes, they're divided into books. And when I'm writing the autobiography, I'm using those books as the chapters. So here's what's happening in this section, the book of the chariot, or the book of whatever. Like I said, a lot of times it's tarot cards, sometimes it's other things, but there'll be like this current of things that keeps popping up, and I'll be like, okay, I understand this is the energy current. And as soon as I acknowledge that, it tends to drop off a little bit with the synchronicities,
Mhm.
which to me is always kind of like an acknowledgement. It's like, okay, you figured it out. We don't have to flood you with this anymore. Um, so yeah, that's what I mean by current of energy. It's like they shift, things change. Um, and I like to, and every once in a while, I'll try and figure out what I need to understand that I'm going to be dealing with in the future. And I use tarot for that a lot. It's generally pretty accurate. I don't always understand it, but when I look back at it, I'm going, "Oh, yeah, no, that makes sense."
Well, I find like the tarot card and a lot of its archetypes are actually really Christian based. You get a lot of these things in deep, long Christianity. So I always find it interesting when I see people who are r- religious get all upset about it. I'm like, well, it's like the king, the queen, it's all this stuff. I also find it interesting when they get upset about the Ouija board because I don't think the board itself is doing anything. I think the people are. So I don't know. Do you want to talk? Like, I find tarot card. I have a deck is interesting, but I see them as like actually Christian archetypes for the most part.
If I remember right, tarot started as a game,
Mhm,
and it was just a card game at one point, and at some point it got turned into something more symbolic. Um, I don't know if it's Christian archetypes. I could definitely see some of that in there. Obviously,
mhm.
Crowley removed a lot of that when he did his Toth deck.
Well,
Um,
yeah, it depends on the deck.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff from that time period would have heavy Christian influences. And Ouija boards were also just a game. I don't think there's anything inherently evil about Ouija boards. I think that they can open you up to potentially negative things, but they're just a tool. It's not the board itself that's evil or negative or anything like that. It's what you're potentially communicating with and how you're dealing with what you're communicating with. Uh, that plays a lot into it. And of course, it's meant to be spooky, so you're kind of going in with that fear in mind when you're playing around with a Ouija board, in a dark room with candles, and everyone's a little bit afraid, and so the chances of dredging up something a little more negative go up.
It certainly does. Now, it's interesting that you're having a couple of shows on Seth come out because my husband's been listening to the book, and I had known about it because of the Law of Attraction and The Secret. And who was it that someone referenced? I think it was Abraham Hicks. They referenced Seth, so I knew about it, and I hadn't really gone through it. But he's been listening to it. It's totally changed his look on things about being more positive and looking at life differently and realizing not everything, you can't control everything, but some of the things that you're looking at are, you're actually bringing them to you. So, can you can you speak to how it changed your life or do you focus on that a lot? Is that a topic that you like to come back to?
It seems to be a topic that just comes up. It's one of those things where I'll be looking at something and be like, "Oh, Seth actually commented on this," and it makes sense. For me, I was going through a very long dark night of the soul sort of experience, and I couldn't shake out of it. And I had started I started looking up near death research online. This was like probably around 99 or so, just to see if anything new had been, anyone had come up with anything new. And going through all these websites, a lot of them would be fairly scientific in what they were reporting, but a lot of them would also throw in, "Oh, and Seth said," and I'm like, "Why Seth? Why do you keep mentioning this one channeled entity?" And it was consistently Seth. And so I finally found this doctor who had done a near death study, and he didn't believe in near death experiences. He was a heart doctor. And what he did is he took every single person that he did heart surgery on and he gave them a questionnaire. And in that questionnaire, it would ask you this everyone the same questions, no matter if they had a near-death experience or not, including things like, what do you think was happening during the operation, your resuscitation period, etc. And he found that the people who claimed to have near-death experiences were very, very accurate if they were out of body and could explain what was happening in the room, to the point where he was kind of freaked out about it. And he's like, huh, these people are definitely experiencing what they say they're experiencing. They're seeing it from this level, because there's no way they would have known this information otherwise. Um, the people who didn't have near-death experiences, their descriptions were kind of like what you would see on television, which is generally not very accurate. Because he asked them to make, even if you don't know what happened, make up what you think happened. Tell me what you think was going on during the operation. So he walked away from that with a certain amount of like, okay, these people are experiencing something very real I can't explain. But one of the things he found is that people didn't have to die to have a near-death experiences or an NDE. Some people never died but had an NDE. Other people died, didn't have an NDE. And I was like, okay, well, that's the first I've heard of that. That's interesting. And so finally I said, okay, why does Seth keep coming up? And so I'm like, I have a Seth book here somewhere that I picked up because I thought it might be amusing. And it was like $1 at a used bookstore. And so I dug around, found it. There's a chapter on what happens when you die. And I start reading through it. And the first thing Seth says is that people leave their bodies at different times. That some people, when they die, leave their bodies before the body is dead. Other people will stick around long after the body is dead. And I'm like, okay, so the first thing I read just explained the research that this doctor just did, that no one else had come to, as far as I know, no one else came to that conclusion prior. And I'm like, okay, now I'm interested. So I started reading more of the Seth book, and it brought me out of that dark night of the soul, because it gave me a whole different way to view the universe. Even if it's wrong, um, the methodology and stuff in it works. It's kind of like Carlos Castaneda. We know Castaneda probably did not have the experiences he said he did, but he studied shamanic cultures and stuff like that, and that's what he built the book off of and all the practices off of. Hence, the practices work, even if the story is essentially fictional. So I don't know what Seth was. I have a book called The Magician's Dictionary, and it was put out by Feral House, and the only channeled entity I think in there is Seth, and they literally say Seth might be the only like convincingly channeled entity ever. And I would say that's, a lot of these other ones, they're definitely channeling something, but they're not getting the level of detail and such that Seth brought.
Mhm.
Seth was extremely specific and extremely detailed, did not make any extraordinary claims, and the practices he sets out actually do work.
Well, the one thing that I find interesting about it is, instead of feeling like you're just going through life in a ping pong game and it's crazy, you actually start to realize that your mind is your tool. You do have some control, and get your head out of the mainstream. Realize that everyone at some level is going to try to control you, and you actually get to decide kind of where you want that and what you want. If you want a life of some sort, don't go and listen to somebody who hasn't produced that or whatever, but it kind of gives you some more hope, rather than just life sucks, everyone's screwing me over. Now you're like, I need to test this out and get curious. And actually, I do have some control, and there's something more to what the system's telling me. And I honestly believe that the system doesn't want us to know this. They really want to control our thoughts. Clearly, it doesn't matter what political party it is, they want to control you. It's the same with, like, I find there's mysticism to Christianity. I love reading about it, but the same people that have taken over every system today took over Christianity and made it about all their same shit. So I like to go and kind of look at the mysticism and the beauty of Christianity as well, not just paganism, but they're all connected in some way anyways.
Yeah, they've all been built off of each other at some point. Like when you look at the original teachings of Jesus, they resemble a lot of stuff in Buddhism. because it's all about love and connection and stuff like this. It's the churches trying to take power over the people that put a lot of negativity into this stuff and have manipulated it to make it a tool of control. And of course, now, yeah, I mean, both political parties have their own agendas, and there's another agenda behind all of that, which is probably run by military-industrial complex,
And
which
there's
is
probably
going,
one above that.
yeah, and exactly. And but I mean, those are the people who are deciding whether we go to war or not. It's not, the politicians that we're putting in office. There is, yeah, it's out of our control in a lot of ways. It doesn't matter who we elect. The situation probably isn't going to change drastically. And if we did manage to elect someone who tried to change something drastically, like JFK, they're probably not going to make it all the way through their term. I think once they assassinated JFK and realized, well, we can get away with this. We can do whatever we want. And they've with projects like MK Ultra and stuff, more and more they've learned how to manipulate people and keep people under control without people realizing they're being controlled. And the media now does that on a 24/7 basis, where they keep people in fear. They want to turn right against left, left against right, when that's not where the issue is. It's the people at the top running everything and hoarding all the money, instead of letting the culture flourish, because to them, we're just the people that we're their workers. They're bottom.
Yeah, well, we're also their cash cow and their energy cow, and I think they get things manifested from controlling our thoughts, because then our thoughts go in their direction, right? And amen to that, because I have a lot of conservative friends. I have a lot of friends all over, and I just want to repeat that. They're literally, they want us to hate each other. I got to stop it. They got to stop it, because that's what they want, and that's how they control. That's the biggest control tactic. You're so 100% right. 100%.
There is, I find, like, I have friends on both sides, and I find that most of them agree on 90% of stuff. Sometimes even 100% of stuff. It's how we should do it that varies.
Mhm.
And those small differences are usually what are used to attack one another. The media focuses on differences, or makes up stuff, or exaggerates something that is not a big issue, in order to distract us from what the real issues are. So the media will suddenly focus in on something and be like, oh, we need to do something about this. And then they throw all the fear mongering into it. And the next thing you know, there's all these movements and everyone's distracted by it. And who knows what's going on behind the scenes
Yeah.
that's distracting us from.
And then, 3 months later, you don't hear anything about it, because it's on to the next. And right now, because we have information going so fast, it's not just one news thing. Well, they're like, boom, 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 boom. Like, they're throwing it at us. And I think it's making people really sick. That's why I take breaks off of X for like 3 days in a row, so I can get things done. And I share content and everything, but I take breaks because I have to, because I don't want to go insane. Because yes, the media and the news, I don't watch TV anymore, but now it's, other things can affect you as well. So you kind of have to clear your mind out.
Yeah. Yeah. I try not to pay attention to much news. There's a few websites I do like that seem to be a little unbiased. Like Covert Action, I think, is really interesting, because they will notate everything they're talking about, and they're looking at what America is doing behind the scenes around the world, and generally not in a good way. There was actually, my vet told me a story. He was in Vietnam, but he went over to visit, and he said there was a cave there where the people who were living in this cave were trying to escape the Vietnam War. He went to visit the cave. He had nothing to do with the events that happened, but they were just farmers. It was their families and stuff living in this cave, and they'd come out and they'd farm, and then they'd go back into the cave to avoid any military actions or anything like that. And at some point, our military bombed the cave, even though there was nothing to do with enemy actions or anything. They just slaughtered them. And he went into the cave, and he said you could feel the heaviness of the energy there. And I thought that was very interesting. but our military does these things, and we've formulated revolutions all over the world, and we've been behind assassination attempts and all this other stuff. And when you really look at it, it's again, it's hard to say even how we fix this issue because they have so much control. Um, we
It
really
does feel
don't.
hopeless.
Yeah, it feels very hopeless because they're definitely not pushing things in the right direction.
No. And nobody feels that they are at all. Nobody does, and we're just gonna probably rip each other apart over it. That's what, like I said, I think though this stuff, if more people knew this, they would. But we're such herd animals. It's hard. People get scared about this. They're like, oh my god, you're talking about the occult. It's like, no, we're just talking about your thoughts. You can still be a Christian and sit there and go, "Oh, my thoughts. I can do my thoughts and focus on other things." You can do it however you want. It's just you apply it to whatever you're doing. It's just where you're thinking and where you're vibrating and how you want your community to be.
And I think accepting people for who they are is incredibly important. Um, and we do have that herd mentality. We have that tribal sort of thing, which is one of the things that keeps us from progressing. Um, you see it even with sports teams, how angry people can get at people who like other sports teams. It's like, it's a game. It's okay to, root for a team, but when you're getting to the point where you're hating the people who root for another team, you got to step back. And again, the media knows how to manipulate that tribal mentality that like these are the people that are your tribe, everyone else is the enemy, and it keeps you contained. It keeps you from growing beyond that limited sort of echo chamber and that limited sort of view of the world, rather than just kind of being like, okay, everyone's going to have a different experience of life. Even twins don't have the same experiences, and those experiences are going to shape how we view the world and how we react to different information. Um, Someone having a bad experience with a certain type of person is going to be like, well, I don't like that type of person. Where someone who has a good experience with a certain type of person could be like, but I love that type of person. What's
Happens
wrong
to
with
me all
you?
the time. I'm
Yeah.
like, what the hell?
So it's one of those things that we need understanding, and we need to not put our own view of things on other people. And it's
Which
like,
is
as long
hard.
as you're
Which is
not hurt,
hard.
it's hard. And as long as you're not hurting anyone else, like, people can do whatever the hell they want as far as I'm concerned.
Mm,
They should to be
mm,
their they should strive to be their true self as much as possible. And that's not always easy either, because it's a matter of throwing away a lot of assumptions and a
mhm.
lot of stuff that's ingrained into you as you're growing up by, your parents and your peers and stuff like that. And getting down to like, who am I really if I toss all this stuff out?
J- Though I think it is important if you want to hold a nation together or any kind of community together to have some common boundaries. So, I mean, perhaps we need to define what those common boundaries are, but the media is never going to do that. They're never going to say, hey, you know what? Almost everyone in America, or everyone here wants this, and that, like, they all want this. So let's put this out as how we're common. We want family, we have this, we have all these values. They're never going to do that. They're just going to present the negative and the terrible stuff, like you said. And so I like that we're talking about Seth and focus on, I don't know how to get it out, because I don't know. It's if we just have to come to some singular point and everything has to collapse, I have no idea what's going to happen. But it's it's certainly I'll tell you one thing. When I was a little kid in the 80s and the 90s, I never saw this shit coming. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, well, I think at that point everyone was just afraid of nuclear war. Um, this is a whole different ball game of manipulation and control, and getting
So,
underneath that is,
well, I mean, to wrap it up, I want to go into. I had some guests on a while back, and we were talking about AI and all this stuff, because that's where things are going. They want AI to control the entire internet, not us. I mean, why even be on there? It's so crazy. But she was saying this to me, and she's brilliant. They do the Obelisk podcast. Love them. Nish, she was telling me that we are the ghosts. We're going to be the ghosts from AI. And I was looking at stuff and I was like, oh my God, it's almost like AI is a tulpa, and we've been giving all our energy to this system, that we're doing it right now, if that's the case. And it's almost like it's going to become a stronger being than us. Do you think that's like the future? Like, where does this go? And we can tie it off with that.
I think the thing with AI is that, everyone's afraid of Skynet. Oh, AI is going to become conscious and wipe us out. I think it's more likely that we're going to put too much reliance on a tool that isn't able to handle that reliance, and that something really bad is going to happen because of it. I mean, right off the bat, you saw, I think it was a Overeaters um, phone line that people could call, and they decided to fire everyone and just have AI take the calls. And AI was giving the most awful advice to these people, and people started complaining. And it's like, yeah, that's not what AI is there for. Like it immediately, like it's like, oh, we can just fire people and have AI do it. Yeah, but AI is going to screw it up because it's not actually intelligent. It's just going off algorithms, and it's basically Google searching stuff and learning how to do it. And that's not always going to be the right way to do it. And it doesn't have nuance, and it doesn't understand. It's just giving information. Um, there's a movie I just watched called The Creator, which I really enjoyed. And it was done by the same guy who did Rogue One. And it's about AI and how they integrate it into society more. And then one of them nukes LA. And so the Western culture decides it's going to wipe out AI, but the Eastern culture, and I forget what they called it, New Asia or something like that, it still embraces AI. And at some point during the movie, this is a minor spoiler, but at some point during the movie, one of the AI says to the guy, "We didn't nuke LA. It was a coding error on a human's part." And I'm thinking, that's exactly what is probably going to happen. We're letting AI that's not actually intelligent do this stuff, and we are kind of creating a tulpa for it. There's this sort of consciousness for it, but it's not actually conscious. It's not complex enough to be conscious. It's still just programming algorithms.
Well, I wonder if we can ever get there, because I was talking to a friend and she says that's what's stopping them, is that she says basically if you remove humans from the conversation, that the AI bots just start they descend into madness and not making sense, and they can't even function. So it involves obviously us to continuously feed it right now.
Yep. And it's a good tool to be utilized, and it definitely can be utilized in creative ways, and it can do some interesting stuff. But yeah, once it starts feeding off itself, it degrades very, very quickly. Um, there's something else to our intelligence, to who we are, that you can't replicate in a limited computer system. And I don't think there's a great story out there. There's a podcast called the Everlasting Stories podcast, and they did, I think, the first story on there. It's like a 4 or 5 part story, but in it is a computer that was the first actually invented, like true AI, and someone incarnates into it. So the structure of the computer is such that it can actually hold consciousness. And the guy can remember all his past lives and all this other stuff because he has, it's not organic because it's a computer. He didn't forget all this stuff when he incarnated. And like just the concept I thought was really brilliant, because the reason he's an AI that's actually artificial intelligence is that he is a real consciousness, a real soul that incarnated into this computer.
Wow. That's fascinating, and I think it really speaks to the level of the organic material. And I mean, it really just goes to show you that Bill Gates isn't God yet. They
Yeah.
want to be. I
Yeah.
think they're fooling themselves.
Yeah. Well, when you have a lot of money, you can kind of do whatever you want, and people will agree with you.
It's true. Anyways.
Or, you know, if you have enough money, you can say whatever you want and other people will go and try and make it true for you.
Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? Well, we're in more numbers, so hopefully we start smartening up and learning this trick about the wealthy. But I want to thank you for coming on the show, Seriah.
Sure.
And I hope you come back.
Absolutely.
Again.
Anytime.
It was phenomenal. It's yeah, I'm doing a lot of stuff around Utah. Hopefully I'll expand to other places and investigate. Kind of become an American now. It's exciting. So I thank you for coming on, and that was a fascinating discussion.
All right. Well, thank you.
All right, everybody. I thank you guys for coming on. Just before we go, I just want to let you guys know the shows that are coming up in the next 3 weeks. Next week, I have Dr. Dean Bertram. He's coming on to talk about the Shaver mysteries. Then I have by the way, that's on the 3rd of January. I gave him a couple of days to recover for New Year's. And I believe that's at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. On the 9th of January, Bob Antone's coming on, and he does a lot of historian ghost tours. He's talking about some of his experiences. The 16th, this is a good one to watch out for horror movie fans. I have Gary Parsons. He's a film director. His father worked for Hammer Horror. So he knew all the greats. Gary knew Christopher Lee and all those greats. He's coming on to talk about his lecture that he's doing on Hammer Horror. So if you're a fan of Dracula, Frankenstein, and all those classic movies with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, and you want to hear his lecture and us talk about that, be there on the 16th. It is at 3 p.m. because Gary is out of the United Kingdom, but 3 p.m. Mountain Time, January the 16th, be there. We're going to be talking Hammer Horror. And that's it, guys. I thank you guys for showing up. Stay spooky. And remember, subscribe, like, share, and rate the podcast on the audio. And I appreciate all of you for being here today. Thank you so much.